Welcome to English with Zenko Master. Get ready to learn something new today.
I was sorting through the old storage boxes in my mother's attic when I found it. The photo was stuck between two dusty albums, almost hidden. I pulled it out and wiped off the cover. It was an old picture of our family taken at the lake house. I remembered that day clearly. I was 10 years old. The sun was shining. My mother wore a yellow dress. My father held a fishing rod. My older brother Sam sat beside me on the wooden dock. But what I didn't remember was the man standing behind us. He looked like he belonged there. He smiled calmly, his hand resting on Sam's shoulder. But I knew instantly, I had never seen that man before in my life. I stared at his face, confused. My heart beat faster. I turned the photo over, hoping for a name or a date. All it said was, Lake Day, 1997. That was it. Nothing else. I held the photo closer and looked again at the man's face. He wasn't part of our family. Not then. Not ever. I walked slowly to the window. The attic smelled like old paper and dry wood. My hands felt cold. It wasn't just confusion I felt. It was something heavier. A kind of fear that had no clear shape. I carried the photo downstairs. My mother was asleep in her chair in the living room. She had been sick for months. She didn't speak much these days. Her eyes were tired, and her memories often slipped away. I sat beside her and waited. I didn't want to wake her with a question I wasn't ready to ask. Later that night, I looked through the other albums. Dozens of photos from birthdays, holidays, school plays, and camping trips. In every picture, our family looked the same. Father, mother, Sam, and me. No strange man. No one extra. Except that one time, that one day at the lake. I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed with the photo on the nightstand beside me. The man's face stared back at me in the dark. I tried to remember that summer. I remembered the cold water on my toes. I remembered the ice cream melting too fast. I remembered Sam's laugh. But no memory of that man. Nothing. The next morning, I drove to Sam's house. He lived across town with his wife and 2 children. I showed him the photo and watched his face. At first he smiled. "That day was fun," he said. Then he looked closer. He didn't smile anymore. He frowned and leaned in. "Who is that?" he asked quietly, pointing to the man. I shook my head. "You don't remember him?" I asked. Sam looked again and again. "No. I've never seen him before. How is that possible?" We sat at the kitchen table for a long time. His kids played in the next room. The sound of their laughter made the silence between us feel even heavier. Sam turned the photo over. "Where did you find this?" he asked. "In Mom's attic," I said, "buried under some old boxes." Sam didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "Maybe he was a friend of Dad's? Or someone who lived nearby?" But we both knew that didn't make sense. Even if he had been a neighbor, why was he in our family photo like that? So close. So familiar. That night, I sat with the photo again. I stared at the man's face until I could describe every part of it. His hair was dark, but starting to gray at the sides. His shirt was simple, his shoes dusty. He looked calm. Too calm. Like he knew something we didn't. The next day, I took the photo to the lake house. It was still there, quiet and old. We hadn't been back in years. I stood on the same dock, the same wooden boards beneath my feet. I looked around. The water moved slowly. Trees swayed in the wind. Everything looked the same. Peaceful. But not in my heart. I held up the photo and tried to match the background. The trees. The house. The dock. Everything fit. Except the man. I walked around the property. The house was locked. I peeked through the windows. Dust covered the furniture. A few of Sam's old toys still sat on the shelf. I remembered summer nights with board games and popcorn. But that memory felt distant now, like a dream that slips away when you wake. Behind the house was a small shed. I had forgotten about it. It was always locked when we were kids. My father told us not to go inside. I walked to the door and touched the rusty handle. It creaked open. Inside were tools, fishing gear, and old boxes. I stepped in carefully. The air smelled of metal and old rope. A broken chair leaned against the wall. I looked around slowly. In the corner was a small box, different from the rest. Newer, clean. I opened it. Inside were more photos. Some were of our family, but many were not. I didn't recognize the people. Some photos were blurry. Some were clear. But one thing was the same in almost all of them. The man from the lake photo. He was always there. Sometimes close to the camera, sometimes far. Always watching. Always present. My hands shook. I looked through more pictures. One showed him standing by our house. Another showed him near my school. A third one had him behind a tree during Sam's 10th birthday party. I had never noticed him in the background before, but now I couldn't unsee him. Why were these photos hidden here? Why had no one told us about him? I took the box and drove home. My heart raced the whole way. At every red light, I looked around, half expecting to see his face in a nearby car. At home, I placed the box on the table. My fingers trembled as I picked up the phone. I called Sam. "You need to come," I said. "Now." Before I share the rest of my story, I need to know, where are you listening from? Knowing someone hears me, understands me, gives me strength. Sam arrived quickly. He didn't speak at first. He just looked at the box on my table. I opened it and showed him the photos, one by one. His face grew paler with each one. "That's our backyard," he said, pointing to one. "That's the treehouse." He paused. "He was there?" That whole day? I nodded. And this one, I said, pulling out another, is from your birthday. Look at the cake on the table. Look at his face. He's not smiling in this one. Sam leaned back in his chair. Why did Mom keep these? He whispered. Why didn't she ever say anything? I don't think she remembers, I said. She barely knows what day it is now. And if she does know, maybe she never wanted us to see them. Sam ran his hand through his hair. This is not normal. This man, he followed us. For years. We sat in silence for a long time. I picked up one of the photos. It showed the man in front of a hospital. I remembered that place. It was where our grandmother had stayed before she passed away. I had gone there once with my father. I looked at the date on the back, written in small, neat numbers. It was the same day we had visited. I showed it to Sam. Do you see this? I asked. His eyes narrowed. He was outside the hospital when you were there? I nodded. Sam looked angry now. We need answers, he said. We need to talk to someone who might know who he is. Who? I asked. Dad's gone. Mom can't tell us anything. We don't even know his name. Sam stood and started pacing. Maybe a neighbor from back then. Someone who lived near the lake house? Someone who might remember him? It was worth a try. The next morning, we drove to the old neighborhood near the lake house. Most homes looked the same. A few had changed, with new fences or gardens. We knocked on 3 doors before someone answered. An elderly woman came out. Her name was Mrs. Blake. I remembered her vaguely. She used to give us cookies when we were kids. We showed her the photo from the lake. Her eyes went wide. Where did you get this? She asked, voice shaking slightly. In our mother's attic, Sam said. Do you know this man? Mrs. Blake looked at the photo again. She nodded slowly. Yes. That's Edward. Edward Hill. We looked at each other. A name. Finally. Who was he? I asked. Mrs. Blake leaned on her cane. He used to live down the road. Alone. Quiet man. Didn't speak to many people. But I remember seeing him around. He liked to take walks. Always alone. Did he know our family? I asked. She hesitated. I don't think so. Not well, anyway. But he was around. I remember once. He asked about your father and asked if he still worked at the factory. I thought it was strange. They didn't seem like friends. Sam's eyes narrowed. He asked about our dad? Mrs. Blake nodded. Yes. More than once. We thanked her and left. The name stayed in my mind. Edward Hill. That night, I searched online. There wasn't much. A few mentions here and there. A man by that name had died in 2008. No family listed. He had worked as a night guard at a warehouse near town. No photos online. No personal records. But the name matched the years. It could be him. I went back to the photos. One stood out. It showed him in front of a grave. I looked at the name carved into the stone. It was my father's grave. The photo was dated just weeks after the funeral. He had been there too. Sam and I talked late into the night. We were both shaken. Who was Edward Hill? Why had he been around us for so long? And why had he hidden in the background, never speaking? The next morning, I made a decision. I went to the nursing home to see my mother. She was sitting by the window, her eyes lost in the trees outside. I sat beside her and took her hand. I didn't speak right away. After a while, I placed the photo in her lap. Her fingers touched the edge. She blinked slowly. Then she looked at the photo. She didn't react at first, but then her mouth opened slightly. Her hand trembled. "Edward?" she whispered. My chest tightened. "You know him?" I asked gently. She didn't answer. She kept staring at the photo. "Edward Hill," she said, barely above a whisper. "Who was he?" I asked again. She looked at me now. Her eyes were wet. "I promised not to tell." I leaned closer. "Tell what, Mom? Who was he? Why was he always near us?" She closed her eyes. "For your father," she whispered. "It was for your father." I didn't understand. "What do you mean?" She was quiet for a long time. I thought she had fallen asleep. But then she said, "Your father made a mistake. A long time ago, at the factory, there was a fire. Someone got hurt, badly." Her voice cracked. "Your father, he walked away. He didn't help." My heart dropped. Edward was his friend once. They worked together, but after the fire, Edward was different. He lost everything. His job, his home. He started following us. I felt cold. "Why?" "To remember," she said. "To watch. He didn't want to hurt us. He said it once. Just wanted to understand why your father left him." I sat back, trying to take it all in. "He never spoke to me," she added. "Only left photos sometimes. In the mailbox. No notes. Just pictures. I hid them. I didn't want you and Sam to worry. But he was always there," I whispered. "Always." She nodded weakly. That night, I told Sam everything. We sat in silence for a long time. The man in the photo was not a ghost or a stranger. He was someone broken by what our father had done. Someone who stayed close, searching for something. Maybe peace. Maybe answers. The next morning, I went back to the shed by the lake. I returned the photos to the box and placed it carefully on the shelf. I didn't throw them away. I couldn't. He had been part of our story, even if we hadn't known. For weeks after I returned the photos to the shed, I couldn't stop thinking about him. I walked through my daily life with a quiet weight in my chest. Everywhere I went, I saw shadows behind ordinary things. A man reading a newspaper on a bench. A figure standing too long at a street corner. It wasn't him. I knew that. But my eyes kept looking. My mind kept asking questions that had no answers. I went back to my mother's house more often. Her health was fading. The nurses said she slept most of the time now. Sometimes she opened her eyes and smiled. Sometimes she didn't remember who I was. But once or twice, she whispered the name again. Edward. Her voice was always soft when she said it, like she was speaking to a memory that still hurt. I started sorting through everything in the attic. Every box, every drawer, every paper. It became something I needed to do. I told myself it was about cleaning, organizing, preparing for the future. But deep down, I think I hoped to find one more clue. A letter, a note, something from him. I didn't find anything more about Edward, but I did find parts of my family I had forgotten. Cards I had made in school. A photo of my father holding me when I was small. A letter he wrote to Sam when he turned 18. All these little pieces of our life, silent and waiting in the dust. There was no sign of regret in those letters. No explanation of what happened that day at the factory. No hint of guilt. Only love. Only pride. I tried to believe that he had made a mistake and carried it quietly, but I would never know for sure. My father died when I was 20. He had never spoken of Edward, not even once. One afternoon, I went back to the cemetery. I stood in front of my father's grave for a long time. The wind moved the leaves. The sky was gray. I wondered if Edward had stood there too. I imagined him holding one of those photographs, watching, thinking, trying to understand a man who had turned away. There were no answers on the gravestone, only his name and the years of his life. I thought about writing something, leaving a note, but I didn't. I stood there in silence, and when I left, I felt emptier than before. Sam and I stopped talking about it, not because we didn't care, but because we didn't know what more could be said. The story had no clear end. Edward had disappeared. My father was gone. My mother was fading. What remained was a strange space between grief, guilt, and confusion. At night, I sometimes dreamed of that day at the lake. In the dream, the sun was bright and I was laughing. Then I turned around and Edward was there, holding a camera. He didn't speak. He just watched. And I always woke up before I could ask why. I started writing things down, not for anyone else to read, just for myself. I wrote what I remembered about the lake house, about my father's quiet strength, about Sam's bright laughter, about my mother's long silences. I wrote about Edward too, how his face looked in the photo, how he stood slightly apart, as if he belonged and didn't at the same time. The more I wrote, the more I saw him as a man, not a mystery. He had lost something, maybe a future, maybe trust, maybe hope. And instead of fighting or shouting or seeking revenge, he had chosen to watch from a distance. His presence was his question. His silence was the weight we never noticed. Until now. One evening, I went back to the lake house alone. The sun was low in the sky. The trees cast long shadows on the dock. I sat there with my feet near the water. I didn't bring the photos this time. I didn't need to. I remembered them all. I listened to the birds. I felt the cold wood under my hands. The water moved slowly, quietly. This place had once held only joy for me. Now it held something else too. Something harder, but real. I stayed there until the light faded. Then I stood and walked around the house one last time. I thought about locking the shed again, but I didn't. I left it open. Not because I expected someone to come, but because it didn't need to be hidden anymore. What was in there had already happened. It had already shaped us. Weeks turned into months. My mother passed away quietly in her sleep. We held a small funeral. Sam spoke. I didn't. I listened to the words about her strength, her care, her silence. I thought about the burden she had carried alone and how heavy it must have been. After she was gone, I found a note among her things. It was folded carefully and placed in an envelope with no name. It had only 2 lines. Forgiveness does not erase the past, but it allows us to move forward without fear. There was no signature, no date. I didn't know if she wrote it or if someone else had, but I kept it. I placed it inside the box of photos. I didn't show Sam. I didn't feel the need to explain it. Some things are meant to be carried quietly, not solved or shared. That box now sits on the top shelf in my own home. I don't look at it often, but I don't forget it's there. It reminds me that we all leave marks behind. Some visible, some hidden in the corners of someone else's memory. And sometimes, the people who seem the furthest from us are the ones holding the missing pieces.